A new interactive exhibition opens in Belfast this weekend. It's marking the 100th anniversary of the sinking of the Titanic.
The new £97 million Titanic Belfast experience recreates the world of 1912 and life on the doomed liner. John Stapleton went along to explore.
History's greatest sea wreck, Titanic. On its maiden voyage to New York in April 1912, the liner hit an iceberg and sank. With insufficient lifeboats, 1,500 drowned. Now, 100 years after her sinking, Belfast, the city where she was built, is reclaiming her. I've come to the magnificent new Titanic Belfast experience, a building shaped to remind us of Titanic's huge hull. Here you are transported back to 1912, to the streets of Edwardian Belfast and the decks of the Titanic. This grand staircase was the Titanic's crowning glory. The ship also had its own Turkish baths, its own telephone system and electronic lifts, luxuries unheard of at the time. Here we see the massive scale of the vessel and the tough working conditions at Harland and Wolff, where 14,000 men laboured to build and launch her on this very site in 1911. There's pride now in Titanic, a pride not lost on the relatives of the Guarantee Group, 9 Belfast men who sailed on the ship to make last-minute adjustments and went down with her.
Belfast went into mourning, understandably, but went into shame, and I think we've carried the shame for a long time. But then this city carried a lot of shame over the years, not just Titanic shame.
100 years ago, this place would have been absolutely buzzing with people. There's a famous photograph of the workforce. It's like a Lowry painting. It's just all these little matchstick men, thousands of them. It was a jewel in the British Empire's crown.
If the Titanic is not protected, it'll get stripped until all the jewels have been taken off the old lady's body.
Bob Ballard found Titanic in 1985 and told me he only agreed to be involved with Belfast's new exhibition because they will never display anything taken from the wreck site, a site he's now desperate to stop being picked clean.
It's like, going to the Louvre, you don't go up to the Mona Lisa and tap it with your finger. Go there, see it, respect it, but don't love it to death.
With a new ITV drama and a return to cinemas for James Cameron's epic, now in 3D, new technology retells this incredible story for a new generation. At the city where it all began, the skyline is dominated once again by Titanic.
Wow, that looks fascinating,
I wish them well with that exhibition, yeah.
Yeah.
This coming weekend marks the 100th anniversary of the sinking of the Titanic, but the wreck was only discovered 27 years ago.
The man who found it, Dr. Bob Ballard, has told John Stapleton that the site should be protected from treasure hunters who are doing irreversible damage.
What did you see? Thank you. Iceberg, right ahead.
100 years later, a global market for all things Titanic leaves the ship itself exposed.
The Titanic is really a deep-sea museum with the doors wide open. The Titanic is being loved to death. There's been a lot of damage done to the Titanic. So they go down and they land on the deck and they're tourist dives. They're selling tour dives. And the salvagers. No, there's mostly, they're not scientists. They're mostly people going down to salvage. I just don't want them to land. It's like, going to the Louvre, you don't go up to the Mona Lisa and tap it with your finger. The Titanic is becoming a junkyard. You see big piles of chain and big bags and, there's a lot of trash down there.
And the crow's nest, I got that.
Knocked off, yeah. Up here, we're now going up, traversing the mast, and when we found it, it had a crow's nest.
But given that so few people will actually go down there and see it, does it really matter?
Stop right there. Stop right there. Why is it that we can protect warships, which I agree, and I served in the United States Navy for 30 years, but we can't protect iconic ships like the Titanic?
Talk me through the eureka moment when you finally realised you'd seen the boiler of the Titanic.
2 in the morning. Knock on the door. 2. Hello? The cook sticks his head in the door. The cook's never up in the 6th deck. what's going on? The guys think you might want to, and I blasted right past him. He didn't even finish a sentence. And I scrambled down 6 decks in the middle of it. I thought I almost killed myself. As I walked in, our vehicle went over the boiler. And we had a picture of that boiler right on the bulkhead. And everyone looked at the video, looked up at the picture, looked back, and we realized that this wreckage we were looking at was absolutely the wreckage of the Titanic.
You are known throughout the world now as the man who found the Titanic.
Yeah.
Is that a title you enjoy? I mean, do you?
Well, I must
celebrate?
say, when I came home after all the hoopla and doing all the talk shows and everything, and I came back to my home on Cape Cod, and the phone rang. It was my mother, and I expected her to be all excited. She said, "It's too bad you found that ship." And I said, "Well, why that?" He said, "Well, we're so proud of our sons for getting their doctorates, and you're a great scientist discovering hydrothermal vents, but now they're only going to remember you for finding the Titanic." As they say, moms are always right.
Oh, amazing stuff there. We'll have another special report tomorrow morning from John when he'll be in Southampton to mark the 100th anniversary of Titanic's departure.
This is the Thomson graving dock where the Titanic was serviced and checked over, and this, perhaps more than anything else, gives you an impression of just how big a ship it was. It was longer than 2 football pitches and had 8 decks. It was the biggest moving object on Earth.
God, it really gives you an idea of the size there, doesn't it?
Yeah, looking forward to that report from John tomorrow. John Stapleton is live at the Ocean Dock in Southampton this morning, where a luxury liner began her fateful journey. Morning to you, John. What's the mood around the town today?
Well, I think once people arrive here, Dan, it will be a mood of sombre reflection, because nowhere was hit harder than Southampton by the sinking of the Titanic. More than 500 of the 1,500 people who died came from this area. We have a picture, actually, of the Titanic moored in this very dock at the very spot where I'm standing right now before it set off on its fateful journey. It was a picture used by the film director James Cameron to compile a computer image of the ship for his iconic movie. And of course, Titanic came here to pick up its passengers and crew, but it was conceived and it was built across the Irish Sea in the city of Belfast. The most famous, if not infamous, ship in history, Titanic. She lies now 2.5 miles down on the bottom of the Atlantic, a monument to human arrogance, incompetence and tragedy. To better understand what happened to her, I went to Belfast, to the new Titanic Belfast experience. Here you are transported back to the Edwardian world of 1912, to the very yard where Titanic was built, along with her sister ship, Olympic. 14,000 men laboured for 2 years to build Titanic. One of them, Susie Miller's great-grandfather, Tommy.
100 years ago, this place would have been absolutely buzzing with people. There's a famous photograph of the workforce. It's like a Lowry painting. It's just all these little matchstick men, thousands of them. It was a jewel in the British Empire's crown.
Millions of people had one thought in mind in this era: emigration to America, and the great liners were built to carry them there. One-way, third-class passengers, what was called steerage.
To travel third class on Titanic and Olympic, her sister ship, was better than first class in some of the other ships. Normally, to cross the Atlantic at that time, you had to bring a picnic with you when you're travelling third class. You had to bring all your food. Here they were dined at tables with tablecloths and they were given a menu. It was an experience.
Building these ships required enormous planning. Deirdre McIntyre's great-grandfather was Roderick Chisholm, chief draftsman.
Titanic was spectacular. She was a wonderful feat of engineering and design and craftsmanship. My understanding also is that Harland and Wolff, unlike other shipbuilding companies, they did everything. The hulls, the propellers, the fitting out, everything was done here. We didn't ship it out to somewhere else. Belfast did it all.
But early in the construction process, a critical decision was made. How many lifeboats will be on board?
We'll never need lifeboats for every passenger. They're ferries, nothing more.
On May the 31st, 1911, the great hull of Titanic was launched. A year was then spent fitting her out. Sumptuous cabins, restaurants for first and second class, more basic amenities for a third, rooms and facilities for 2,400 passengers and 900 crew. This is the Thomson Graving Dock where the Titanic was serviced and checked over, and this, perhaps more than anything else, gives you an impression of just how big a ship it was. It was longer than 2 football pitches and had 8 decks, the equivalent of 11 stories. It was the biggest moving object on Earth. Once completed and fully crewed, Titanic left Belfast for Southampton to collect her waiting passengers. Once fully laden, she set off on her maiden voyage for New York. It was the 10th of April 1912, 100 years ago today. And at midday today, we expect to see a flotilla of small craft here in this dock, which, led by a tug tender, will sail out of this dock into the River Test, just as Titanic did on this day 100 years ago. And here on the dock side, we anticipate some 700 descendants of people who lost their lives on the Titanic. They'll be here, and on hearing a recording of the Titanic's whistle, they will throw flowers into the water in commemoration of that event. And also, in about an hour's time, I'll be talking to my ITV colleague Fred Diney, who only recently discovered that he too had a relative who was lost on the Titanic. Back to you in the studio.
OK, thanks for now, John.
This week marks the 100th anniversary of the ill-fated Titanic voyage. We're all talking about it at the moment, aren't we? It's such a fascinating and terrifying story.
It's enduring, isn't it? The tragedy claimed the lives of 1,517 passengers and crew. This morning, John Stapleton meets the descendants of some of those who died with the ship.
In the Belfast dock where Titanic was built, descendants of those who perished admire family mementos of the tragedy. Deirdre McIntyre's great-grandfather was Roderick Chisholm, the ship's chief draftsman. He travelled on Titanic as part of the Guarantee Group, a hand-picked team of workers. He went down with the ship.
They were obviously chosen, not just for their professionalism and their talent and their skills. They were men of integrity. What is precious to us as a family is when the ship left, when Roderick got to Southampton, he purchased 2 vases to send home to his wife Susan. He had time to think of his family and to think of his wife. And to me, that's the story of Titanic.
Did any of the Guarantee boys survive?
No, none of them survived. Not one of them.
Susie Miller's great-grandfather was builder Tommy Miller. He was also on Titanic, and as he said goodbye, he pressed 2 pennies into his son's hands.
Don't spend them till I come back.
My grandfather was only 5. He had really strong memories of his father, and he described how, as he watched Titanic sail away, he was clutching them so tightly in his hands that the date 1912 was burnt into his palm. For me, Titanic is a personal thing. It's not about a ship, it's about a person, and it's about how it shaped my life and my family's future.
Kate Dornan's great-grandfather John was one of Titanic's surgeons. He wrote a letter to his mother on Titanic stationery and posted it before the ship sailed. It's one of many memories she treasures. Tell us about his last night on the Titanic, what you know about that.
The last night was exciting for him because we know that he dined at the head table with people like the Astors and multimillionaires. It was a great night of great revelry and celebration, and he must have just thought he'd really arrived.
Iceberg, right ahead.
Then the blow struck. And then he went up on deck and helped passengers getting into lifeboats, and then said a last farewell.
And then there's Pat Lacey, the great niece of Titanic's captain Edward Smith, a man condemned by history for ignoring the ice warnings.
There is no obligation to go down with the ship, sir.
Isn't that for me to judge?
It was easy to blame it all on him, wasn't it, really? Of course, the bloke wasn't there to defend himself. And I mean, he was ultimately responsible. They didn't really worry that there weren't enough lifeboats. I mean, because it was unsinkable. And I mean, I think when it struck, after it struck the iceberg, people still didn't believe it was going to sink. Lessons were learnt, and I don't think they should be forgotten. You know, that there always are enough lifeboats now. No, I think it should be remembered and regretted deeply.
Amazing stories.
Yeah,
amazing
fantastic
stories. Yeah.
stories. Some of them.
What the people that are fascinated by the